Hello everybody, welcome back to the Kart Racer game development series. So I did tell you last time that we were going to be starting to work on the modeling of our kart today. Actually, that's a lie. I decided to create a video just on the basics of navigating and using Blender, and then we'll have another video right after that is the using Blender to model our kart. So sorry about that. I think this is best because it might be useful for people to skip over if they already have some experience with Blender, or the video about Blender might be useful for other contexts, developing other models. So let's get started anyway. The first thing is that just finding your way around Blender is probably something that you're going to need to do regardless of what you're working on. So let's just take our little cube here and treat it as our object of focus. So what we're going to do, first let me take you through the default project. So when you create a project in Blender, it adds three things to your scene. It adds a camera, it adds a light, and by default it adds a cube. A lot of times people delete the cube, but actually we're going to be using box modeling, which is a technique that's kind of cube-like, so we can actually start with our cube if we want to when we're creating our kart. Anyway, you can select these objects by clicking on them with the left mouse button. And you can also see that there's a hierarchy of objects that are currently in the scene over here. We can name them. We can also make them visible or invisible, which is actually pretty helpful. There's some details about the objects over here, some modifications that we can do. But anyway, that's the basic idea. But we care about this cube. So right now, the first thing I might want to do is look at this cube from different angles. Now, a cube is not a very interesting object, but if this was our kart, we're going to be constantly scrolling around looking at it from different directions. So in order to do that, one thing that we can do is, I mentioned that you had to have a mouse with the scroll button. You don't technically have to, but it really is much, much easier. So probably the best way to do this is to hold down the scroll button or the middle mouse button and drag the mouse. So you can see that allows you to rotate and view the object from different angles. Okay, that's the easiest way, obviously. This doesn't really work with the trackpad exactly. It's a little harder and more awkward, but anyway. Alright, but if you don't happen to have a middle mouse button, you can also use the numpad. So if you have a keyboard with a numpad, the 4, 6, 8, and 2 keys kind of form a little directional cross. You can see that they have arrows on them. But if you push them, the number keys, so if you push 4, for example, we can rotate about the axis here. And you actually, if you look up at the top, we've got a little axis notifier up here. This little blue axis is our Z axis. So that's up and down in our diagram. You can also see that there are these indicators on the plane. So we have a little grid here, and that plane has this Y axis on here. You can see that it's Y because it corresponds to green. And also we have the X axis, which is red. It corresponds to this one right here. And if we were to use the 4 and the 6 keys, those are going to rotate us about the Z axis. So that would let us view. It's not quite as convenient, but actually it works pretty similarly. And you can also drag these handles here in order to do kind of a trackball rotation, which is very similar to the way things work with the scroll button. The only difference is you've got to navigate your mouse up to that area instead of just anywhere in this window. So it is a little easier to use the scroll button, but there are other options if that's what you've got to do because of the lack of hardware. The next thing I want to talk about are what are different views that you might have. So for example, if I'm doing some modeling, sometimes I want to look at this thing directly from the side. And so the first place we're going to go to look at that is we're going to look at the numpad key. So if you push the 1 on the numpad, you'll see, and you can see the label over here, this is the front view. So if you push 1 on the numpad, it goes to front view. It also says that this is an orthographic camera. By default, when you look at it from the side, it doesn't bother to turn on perspective correction, which actually makes it a lot easier for you to grab vertices that are supposed to be in the exact same, X position, for example, in this case, the same X and Z position right here. The vertices that are behind, we might be able to select them right here. So the orthographic camera is actually much more convenient. So when you're looking at it from the side or from the top or from the front or back, then you'll usually be put into an orthographic mode. So pushing 1 on the numpad actually will do that. And if you want to go and look at the back, then what you do is you do Control 1 on the numpad. You can see that takes us to the back. Another option, by the way, is to click on the Y here. So you can see I can click on the Y, and that'll be another way for us to switch back and forth. So let me actually just go to a different view, click on the Y, and you can see it takes us to back. Click on the Y again, it takes us to the front. So we can actually toggle back and forth. So those are two ways of doing that. And then we can also go with the right view. The right view, we push 3 on the numpad. Oops, I am so sorry. I forgot something pretty important today. And that is to turn on the keys. I do apologize about that. Let me just find it. There we go, screencast keys. Sorry about that. I should really do this off camera. And I will just make sure this is okay. Turn it on. Okay. Alright, sorry about that. So yeah, this is the 3 on the numpad. So again, 1 on the numpad shows us the front view, Control 1 shows us the back view, 3 on the numpad shows us the right view, the right side of our object, and Control 3 will show us the left side of our object. So Control basically just reverses the view. And we're going to use 1, 3, and 7 for our 3 views. And those are kind of in the diagonal corners of the arrows formed in the previous step. And also you can click on, so let me go to another view. You can also click on the X here, and that'll also take you to the right view. And then if you click on X again, it'll take you to the left view. Okay. And to view from the top, you can hit the 7 on the numpad, and Control 7 will take you to the bottom view. And the alternative there is to click on the Z here. So just click on the Z. Of course, it's going to kind of position us up on the Z-axis, so it kind of makes sense. And you click on Z again, it'll take us to the bottom. Alright, so that's a good way to navigate around. And if you ever just want to jump to the opposite side of your object, regardless of what view you're currently in, you can use 9 on the numpad. Okay, so regardless of your view, even if you're in a user view, so here for example, oops, I'm upside down, there we go. Let's go kind of close to our camera here so we can see something pretty similar to our camera. Then I can hit 9, and then it'll take us to the opposite side of the object, which is pretty handy just for flip back and forth real quick, because you can always go right back to it just by hitting 9 again. So that's pretty helpful. Sometimes though, you want to really zoom into your object to see some fine details, or you have 2 vertices that are really close together and you want to make sure you select the correct one, or you want to select both of them so that you can join them together. Then you want to zoom in. So the easiest way to zoom in is just to scroll the scroll wheel. So scroll in and out will allow you to see closer. And you can also use this control right here. So if you click on this and drag, you can also use that for zoom in, zoom out. Okay, so that's pretty helpful. And you might also, especially if you're zoomed in, so it's possible I'm too far zoomed in and I can't see what I want to see right now. So what you can do in that case is the controls are exactly the same as if I wanted to rotate, except I hold down the shift button. So I hold down shift, I hold the scroll button down, and I rotate, and you can and then I move my mouse, and you can see that it pans the view around. Okay, so I'm actually kind of changing my center of focus. So if I zoom over here, and now I let go of the shift key and I do the rotation again, you can see I'm rotating about a different point now, because I actually moved my point of focus over a little bit. And then if I hold down the shift key, hold down the scroll button, you can see that here I am moving this object back into view. And now this is kind of almost the center. I didn't quite nail it. An alternative to that, of course, is that I could use this hand here. This is the pan. And you can see that we can scroll around this way as well. That works just as well. Okay. We won't use this very often, but when we want to kind of do a render, maybe just to check to see what the materials look like on our object when we're finally finished, we could use the 0 on the numpad. So what 0 is going to do is it's going to zoom in and show you what the view is from that camera. So you can see the camera right here. You can see the direction it's generally pointing. This is the camera. This is sort of like the screen. And so if you kind of keep on projecting this, you'll see what parts of the scene are going to be visible. So you can move this object around. This is just any old object in the scene, and you can rotate it, and that's how you can point your camera. But if you ever want to see what your camera is currently looking at, then you can just hit 0. So it'll show you in frame what the camera would see. And if that's good, you can do a render, and that'll help you to see your details. If you have some like really advanced texturing and stuff like that, then it's something you want to wait for a minute or so for the render to happen. Okay, so that's the basic idea. I did mention that usually you're going to be using an orthographic camera in Blender, and this is really easy to model using an orthographic camera, but you can actually switch back and forth. So if you want to switch, you can use the numpad 5. Okay, so you can see there's an orthographic camera, which looks a little weird when we're looking at it from a diagonal. Usually when you're in a diagonal, it's a not orthographic camera. So you can see up here it says user perspective. You push the 5 on the numpad, it says user orthographic. That looks a little weird. But I did mention before that when you go into front view or side view or top view, they're by default orthographic cameras. Okay, and you can actually turn it off. You can go top perspective. But let me just show you what that looks like. I'm going to click this button right here. This is the X-ray view. You can also use Alt-Z. And then you can see through this object. You can see that the back face looks a little bit smaller than the front face. Now this is a cube, so that's not actually true, but the perspective camera makes it a little bit awkward. And so even though these two vertices should directly be in the exact same X and Y position, they only should differ by the Z, which is basically coming into and out of the screen. Then it makes it really difficult to select both of those vertices. So we usually prefer in the side views to have an orthographic camera. So that's the basics of looking around. While we're on the subject, a lot of modelers like to have more than one view at the same time. So quickly what I'm going to do is show you how to do that. I think during our modeling session, I'm probably just going to use one. Mainly because if you don't have a widescreen monitor, then it's actually takes up a lot of your screen real estate, and then the object appears quite small. So, but if you want to create more than one view, what you do is you just hover over here where the divider is, and when you see this cursor right here, the double arrow, you right click, and then you pick either a vertical split or a horizontal split. So if we want to do a horizontal split, let's say, we click on horizontal split, and then it will actually allow us to pick the position where I want the split to happen. So as soon as I click, I now get two different views. So for example, this one down here is currently a top view. That's fine. Let's make this one up here a side view. So I'm going to push 3, and now I have a side view and a top view at the same time, which could be really helpful. And then I could divide into 4 if I want to by just hovering right here, click, do a vertical split this time, and then that'll make another one, and I can do the same thing down here. Vertical split. There we go. Theoretically, I've got 4 windows. As you can see, everything's pretty small, so if I had a huge monitor, I probably would do this. If I had a 32-inch 4K monitor, this is totally what I'd be doing. But right now, we're projecting this on the internet, so anyway. So to join these back up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hover in the dividing area. I'm going to right-click. I'm going to pick Join Areas, and that's going to give you the option of which one do you want. So like say I want this one, the right view. And I'm just going to click this, which the right view will actually join this one, and then the other one's gone. It's the same thing here. I'm going to click in the middle, and let's make this one merge over to here. I'm going to say join areas, and there we go. And similarly, I'm going to collapse these two. So I'm just going to select this dividing point. I'm going to do join areas, and let's just keep the top view. Okay, so now you should be able to create whatever user interface is comfortable for you. I just wanted to show you how to do that. Alright, so now Blender has lots of different modes. We're going to use 2 modes primarily. You can see up in the corner here, we're currently in object mode. And so if I click on stuff, I'm clicking on the individual objects. So right now I'm clicking on this cube. I can click on the camera. You can see over here, it kind of highlights it in orange in the viewport. It also highlights it in orange in the scene hierarchy. And as I clicked around to different objects, that's what happens. I'm dealing with objects as a whole. So I can do things like resize the entire object, move the entire object. I can add modifiers to an object. Say I want to smooth out the object and add something like a subdivision surface modifier. I do that at the object level. Or I want to add some surfaces and materials and stuff to my object. I can do that at an object level. And overall, I just want the entire cube to have kind of a wood texture. I do that in object mode. The other mode that we're going to use, even though there's lots of modes, is edit mode. Okay, so these are the two most commonly used ones during modeling. Edit mode, on the other hand, is going to allow me to work with each of the individual parts of an object. So every 3D object has vertices, edges, and faces. And by default, because I had the entire object selected, actually let me go into a non-orthographic mode here, you can see that all the edges, all the vertices, and all the faces are currently selected. Okay? So one thing you might want to do is you might want to select nothing. So whenever you're in Blender, and by the way, these also work in edit mode and also in object mode, if you want to select everything in the scene, and you're in object mode, so let me scroll out so we can see the other objects, you can just hit the A key. And so the A key is going to highlight everything. Now currently our light is not visible, so let's put that back, and then I'll hit A again. You can see that A made all three of these objects currently highlighted. Okay, so the first object that we selected is kind of yellow, and the other ones are orange. That's fine. So if you hit A, then it selects everything. And if you kind of double click the A button, then it unselects everything. You're going to use this all the time, so I'm not going to bother even to tell you the other shortcuts. The keyboard shortcuts are the way. So A to select everything, double A to select nothing. And I'm now seeing that our keys are not showing up here. What's the deal? Okay, sorry about that. Just had to turn the screencast keys back on. Alright. So, alright, I apologize for the distraction. So, let's stay in object mode for a second. So, what we just learned was how to do the select all and to deselect all. So, A and double tap A. I kind of showed you this before, which is the X-ray on and off. So, that's Alt Z on or off. It's not super useful in object mode, but in edit mode it's very useful because it allows you to select things like vertices and edges that are kind of covered up right now. Normally, if I try to click on those vertices, it won't allow me to do it. That's actually, let me switch to edit mode here for a second. I want to click on one of these vertices. I don't even know where it is. I can't see it, but even if I did click exactly where it was, it wouldn't work. But if I do Alt Z, then now I can click them. I can click on edges. I can click on faces on the other side. Okay. Alright. So anyway, going back to object mode. Just generally speaking, we'll usually keep this turned off in object mode, and in edit mode we'll sometimes switch back and forth. Alright. So the next thing is that we might want to move our object around. So if we select our object, I want to move it. M actually means something different in Blender, so we use G. It's easy to remember if you just think grab. So we're going to use the G key, and once I hit the G key, you can see that the object moves with the mouse. So as it scrolls around, as your mouse moves around, it moves around. But we might not want to move it just anywhere, so what I can actually do, if I want it to stay, by the way, wherever I'm moving my mouse, I just click the left button. Just keep in mind, once you do that, you have to do Control Z if you want to undo in order to put the object back in its original position. Let me demonstrate. So click to place it here, Control Z to move it back, and undo the last action. Obviously, understanding undo is pretty important because we're going to make mistakes. Alright, so I'm going to hit G again. And what if I want to limit the motion along the x-axis, along this red line here? So I can do G, and then I can hit X. So even though I'm moving it all over the place here, as soon as I hit X, it now snaps to that line. So I can only move it across that line. And I can even go further if I want to. I can specifically say I want it to move 1 unit. So I can literally just type 1 and hit enter. You can see that it's a little bit to the right now. And if I hit enter, you'll now see that this object has been moved over by one of these grid spaces. So it's pretty helpful if you want a precise movement. So for example, when we're creating our cart and I'm positioning the wheels, it might be really helpful if I can position the wheels very precisely so that it's the same distance away from the car on the right hand side as it is on the left hand side. But you can also use it, so for example, let's do GZ, so we're going to limit the movement on just the Z axis, but you can also freely move it now on the Z axis, so I can move it up as much as I want. I can look at it from different angles, and then I can move it. So for example, from side view, I can do G, Z, and then just moving it just on the Z, and I want it to be, one unit up. There we go. So that's one thing that you can do. Now something quite similar to that is, what if I want to move it on 2 axes at once? Because it's actually quite awkward when I just move it around. It's really hard to tell how it's moving, right? Because this is a kind of a weird way of looking at it. I don't know how far away from me it is. So in terms of the direction in and out of the screen, I can't really tell. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push Shift X, and Shift X is going to stop this. Oops, I accidentally pushed it too many times, sorry. Let me just try this again. Shift X, and you can see now I'm moving on all the axes except for X, right? It's not moving forward and backwards, it's moving side to side along the green axis, and I can also move it up and down along the blue axis, that's the Z axis, and of course I can move it in both directions, a two-dimensional plane. So that's really helpful as well. And I'll just let you know, moving is not the only thing that works that way. Rotation and scaling and some of the other effects in Blender also work exactly the same way. We're going to use this a lot. So that's a pretty helpful thing to know. All right, so here we've got our object. I don't really like where it is, so I'm going to hit Control Z a couple times to put it back in the center of our screen. One more time. There we go. So it's exactly in the center. The center of that cube is exactly at the 0, 0, 0 position, and which is fine. So now let's figure out how to rotate the object. Oh, by the way, one thing I forgot to mention is you have an alternative for moving if you want to. You can click on this, and then you get these handles. Okay, so you can grab this little red square here. This red square will be basically like Shift X, because it's going to move on the green and blue plane here. So you'll see that this is moving along the green and blue plane. It's not moving along the X at all. Okay, again, I'm going to move it back to the center. And similarly, if I just want to move it only on the x-axis, then I can grab the arrow and rotate. It's only moving on the x-axis. So that's another really helpful thing to know. If you don't want to use those keyboard shortcuts or you can't remember them all, you can always click on this. And similarly for rotation, you click on rotation, then it'll give you these handles for rotation. So you see this green circle right here is a handle for rotation. It's green because the axis of rotation is this y-axis right here, which is green. Okay, so we can rotate it along the green axis. Everything is good there. Okay, and similar for the other parts. And we can also scale, but I'll show you that in a moment. Okay, so if you want to rotate using the keyboard, you can use the R key. So if you hit the R key and you just start randomly rotating using kind of a trackball rotation, which is extremely awkward, I'm pretty sure you'll never use this. So I'll just hit escape. I'm going to do R, X, which is only going to rotate about the x-axis, which of course is very helpful. And if I specifically wanted to move, say, rotate 45 degrees, I can literally just type in 4, 5, hit enter, and there we go. It's a nice and 45-degree turn, very accurate. This is an extremely helpful tool. Okay, so let's do it again. We'll do rotate about the x-axis. Let's rotate it negative 45 so that it gets put back. You can just type negative, minus sign, 4, 5, enter. Here we go. And of course, similarly, we can rotate about other axes. So I want to rotate Y, that'll rotate about the Y, rotate Z, that'll rotate about the Z axis. We can do all the rotations. Okay, and again, we can use the handles. We also have scaling, so we can use S for scale. So rotation and scale are just R and S, so those are really easy to remember. The only one that's different is for moving or translating, it's actually the G key. So I like to think of that. That helps me remember. Anyway, so to scale, we can hit S, and if you just do S by itself, it's just a uniform scale. So you move farther away from the object, it'll get bigger. You move toward the center of the object, it'll get smaller, and that's basically how you do that. But if you just want to scale in one direction, let's say, for example, let's just scale in this Y direction here. So I'll do S, Y. You can see that we're just kind of stretching it out. We can even do a negative scale. You notice if it rolls over, we're actually scaling it negative. Okay. And anyway, and there's also the handles here. So you can see that we've got these handles. So you can do the 2 axes at once, or you can just do, say, for example, just the Z direction. Let's just scale in the Z direction. Okay. We'll just Control Z to get rid of that. I don't use the handles, so I like to close them so that I can still kind of see what's going on. Alright, so that's enough for object mode because what we're going to be using most of the time is edit mode. So to switch between object mode and edit mode, which is something you're going to have to do pretty frequently, of course you can go up here, but you can also use the tab key. So tab key will switch back and forth between edit mode and object mode. So let's go to edit mode. And because we often use it in edit mode, I'm also going to turn on the X-ray. So I'm going to do Alt-Z for that. So there we got X-ray view. And I kind of showed you this before, but I didn't really explain it. But we have three different things that we can select. We can select vertices. So for example, here we go. I just selected that vertex. And with X-ray mode on, I can even select vertices at the back. I can also switch to edge mode. So if I want to click on this edge, I can just click on that. It selects the whole edge. And if I switch to face select mode, then I can also select the individual faces. It basically uses proximity to this little dot here to figure out which one you're clicking. All right, this top one, of course. All right, now if you want to switch quickly, again, we don't want to zip over there with our mouse. It would be a lot easier if we just used the keyboard keys. So we're going to use the non-numpad numbers, so everybody will have this on their keyboard. 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so 1 is for vertices, 2 is for edges, and 3 is for faces. So that's how we do that. If you want to select more than one thing, so let's go into vertex mode, and I want to select this vertex, and for some reason the one on the other side, I just hold Shift. It's a pretty standard convention in most computer programs. If you want to select more than one thing, you hold Shift to hold the other thing. So this will actually select both of those vertices. We can add as many of them as we want, which is pretty helpful. By the way, scaling, rotation, and translation work in edit mode as well. So for example, if I want to move these two vertices that I've just selected, I can hit the G key and then watch what happens. I'm moving both the vertices at the same time. It's not looking much like a cube anymore, but anyway, basically there's the idea. Sort of cubish. I'm just going to hit escape so it doesn't happen. If you're ever in the middle of an operation and you don't want to do it, you realize that you hit the wrong mode or whatever, you're accidentally rotating on the wrong axis, just hit escape and it'll go back to normal. And worst case scenario, you can just actually make it happen and then do Control-Z to undo. Another way that you can select things is you can actually box select. So you don't have to do anything to box select, you can literally just drag your mouse. So in this case, we're in vertex mode, so I should highlight these two vertices. You see how we drew a box around those? You can also hit B to enter box select mode if you want to. But you'll see that it's sort of additive in that mode. If I don't hit B and I just do this, you'll see that it will erase the selection and replace it with whatever was inside the box. But if you hit the B button, then it'll add the vertices to it. And I don't actually find that latter use case come up very often. You could just hold the Shift key and use the drag select as well. But anyway. All right, remember if we want to deselect all of these vertices, we could just hit double tap A. Another thing that we can do is we can also use circle select. So if we hit C for that purpose, maybe I don't want to click so precisely on these vertices. In this case, a cube, its vertices are pretty spread out. And so I want to use this circle here. If I use the scroll button, the scroll wheel, I can actually change the size of the circle so I can get the precision that I want. And that'll allow me to click on the vertices that I need. You can see, just like box select, it's additive. So I don't have to hold down Shift. It's just going to keep adding vertices every time I click one. And you hit escape to get out of that mode, just like you would in box select if you change your mind about using box select. All right, so that's just selecting things. And of course you can do all the same stuff with faces and edges that I'm demonstrating to you with vertices. I want to show you a couple of basic features that we're going to be using over and over again. It's going to get a little monotonous, and I do apologize about that. What I'm going to show you now is how to do extrusion. So I'm going to extrude a face. So let's say, for example, I've got this box here. I want to click on this face, and then I want to stretch this face out this way. That's pretty similar to scaling the object along the y-axis, but it's a little bit different, and I'll explain why. So if you hit the E key, that'll allow you to extrude. By the way, if you want to extrude along the y-axis, you could hit Y at this point in time. But because the y-axis is exactly perpendicular to that face that we are stretching, it's going to go along the y-axis anyway. But if I wanted to extrude it on a different axis, for example on the x-axis, I could do that. That looks bizarre, but you could do that. Okay, let's try this again. I'm going to do E to extrude, and I'm going to pull it out like this. So you notice the key difference here is that the box still exists. All of its original vertices didn't move. With a scale, its vertices are just growing bigger. All of its faces and edges are just growing bigger. But when I do an extrude, I'm actually stretching this out. Okay, so I'm actually making an additional set of geometry, and this is what we're going to be using constantly. So when we make our car, for instance, I'm going to make a little chunk of the car, shape it the appropriate size, and then I'm going to extrude out a piece. I'm going to shape that to the appropriate size so that each of these little sections of the car can have a different height, and that's how we can get the shape that we want. And we're going to need additional geometry for all the details and features in our car. Even though it's going to be low poly, there's still going to be some details. So that's the extrude feature. So again, that's E on the keyboard. We want to extrude. Now, for example, let's do one more. I'll do extrude right here. Without pushing any keys, you can see that it's extruding on the z-axis because it kind of highlights that. Oh, sorry, the x-axis, because it kind of highlights that in blue. I say z because z is normally blue. It's going to show you the extrusion axis. This is what we're going to actually extrude on by default. I can overwrite this if I want to, but this is the default. Okay, so now we're actually starting to create something here. I don't know what it is, but we're starting to create something. So that's extrude. So now if I want to inset this face, inset is going to basically create new geometry that's like right on top of this face, but it's going to shrink it down so that we have a quad right here that kind of looks like this shape, like a trapezoid shape, a little trapezoid quad here, a little trapezoid quad here, a little trapezoid quad here, and then a rectangle on the inside. All of these are quads, basically four-sided polygons, and that's basically what an inset looks like. You can actually inset out, but what we're going to do is we're going to inset in, which is the one that makes a lot of sense. So then I'm just going to drag it to where I think is appropriate. I'm going to click right there. And here's one way that you can kind of get these things working together. Now that I have this new face with all the, sorry, I have this new shape here. I have all of these faces that I have. I'm going to select this one, and I'm going to hit extrude again. And again, I can actually extrude in and make like a little tunnel. So maybe this is like an air duct or something that I can crawl through in my stealth game. Let's take a look. You can see we actually have an object now. Let's turn off X-ray for a quick second. You can see we're starting to get some actual objects. So you can see these are really simple functions, but they're pretty powerful. So I mentioned before about needing geometry for details. Oftentimes I might need geometry. I may decide that this little tube right here is not supposed to be perfectly flat. So I actually want this tube to have some variations in the height, let's say. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to create a bunch of additional geometry. One really easy way to do that is to create a loop cut. So I'm going to do Control R for that, and now I'm in loop cut mode, and whatever edge I happen to be near is the one that's going to basically divide. So right now I'm near this edge right here, and so it thinks that that's the edge I want to loop cut, and so it creates this cut that basically is a loop all the way around the object. And if I pick this edge right here, you'll see it'll create, it's kind of a weird loop, but it'll go around all the geometry in that one spot. So this is actually pretty handy. Let's make one right here. So I'm going to click in order to start the process. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the scroll wheel. Oops, I screwed that up, sorry. What I'm going to do, let's undo that. I'm going to do Control Z to undo it. I'm going to do Control R. And before I click, I forgot to do this, I'm going to use the scroll wheel to increase the number. You can, by the way, also use the keyboard and you can type in the number. Let's, for example, create 5 loop cuts. Yeah, 5 loop cuts, good. And then it gives us the option of where do we want to put those loop cuts on the shape. If you want them to be in their default, then that's fine. You can just hit escape. And now you can see we've got a whole bunch of this geometry that we could use. And so, for example, if I wanted to select the edges, I'm in edge select mode here. I want to select these edges. Let's say, for example, I want to select this edge. Then what I can do is I can do something like G to move, Z to restrict it to the Z axis, and now I can make this adjust. I obviously don't want to go too far because I'll actually intersect with the interior of this thing. Let's make it kind of like a corrugated appearance. I'm going to do G and Z. There we go. That's actually not a great way of doing it, so let me undo that twice, and I'll show you the better way to do that. What I would do in that case is I would select this edge, and this edge using the Shift key, and then I would move them all at the same time, so G, Z, and that way I can be sure that they're all the same exact height. So that's a really good thing. Alright, so that's a loop cut. And of course you can make horizontal loop cuts, you can make loop cuts in any direction. You just got to choose the correct edge in order to make that happen. Finally, the last thing, I'm going to use face select mode for this purpose. Alright, let's do this one right here. We're going to do a bevel. So B is already used for box select if you remember, so we're going to do Control B. Okay, so when you do Control B, that actually lets you do a bevel shape to this. There's actually a modifier that you can apply to the entire object and basically bevel all the sharp edges into this nice little beveled shape. But this is a way for you to just do it on a case-by-case basis, which is really helpful. Okay. Even though I don't think this geometry in particular needs this, one thing that you could do is I might want to create a face over this hole for some reason. Okay, I just want to enclose this shape. So I'm going to go into vertex select mode. I'm going to select these 4 vertices. So click, 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 click. And now that I have all the vertices necessary, this could make a quad, or it could be a triangle or some other polygon or whatever. I can just hit F, and it'll add a face. So F to add a face, but you have to add all the sides. You can also select all the edges. If you want to, select these 4 edges, and then hit F to make a face between those edges. Alright, sound good so far? Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into face selection mode. I have this one face selected, and let's zoom out a little bit and just get a better angle. What I'm going to do finally is I'm going to do a control and then plus on the numpad. So it has to be a plus on the numpad, but watch what happens when I do that. You can see that it kind of grows the selection. Maybe this angle is not the best. So let's actually look at this from a different angle. So now I'll do a control plus again. You can see it growing more and more and more. And if you want to shrink the selection, you can also do Control and the subtract button, the minus sign, on the numpad. It has to be the numpad because that's a different key than the plus and minus at the top by your numbers. Okay, so this will allow you to kind of increase and decrease. Pretty handy. All right. Another kind of selection that you might want to do is you might want to look at a specific edge loop. Now I don't have it selected anymore, but I could select, I'm sorry, I'm not in edge mode. I could select this edge and then this edge, and then I can awkwardly kind of zoom around and click this edge and all the way around. And that's kind of awkward. So one thing that you can do is you can actually just hold down the Alt button and click, and it'll select the whole loop all the way around. So if you wanted to do something with that loop, I don't know, for example, I want to scale all of those vertices, so I'll do an S. Okay, and I'll just expand that out. You can see that that'll make it bigger in all directions, all those vertices. So basically that rectangle shape is going to be grown. I could also rotate it. Let's rotate it about the x-axis. That's going to look weird. We'll rotate it about the x-axis. There you go. Gives us a whole bunch of flexibility. Alright, so we can do this and Alt-click in order to select these edge loops. So Alt-click. You can see it selects the whole edge loop. So you're actually going to do this on a regular basis. So, and by the way, all of these features you can see, extrude, inset, bevel, loop cut, and so on. All these things exist over here if you want to, but Blender is really all about the keyboard shortcuts. If you want to be efficient in Blender, it really is necessary, unfortunately, to memorize a lot of keyboard shortcuts. I think over time, it'll become second nature to you. I'm hoping that with me having the screencast keys turned on will be helpful, and I'm also going to try to mention wherever possible. I'm going to mention what those keys are. So that's it for an introduction to Blender. I'm also going to be recording the next episode, which is going to be creating our cart. But I'm going to assume that everybody has all of this knowledge going into it, but at the same time, I'm still going to call out the keys as we start to develop our object. I'm not going to save this scene. This is useless. I don't know what the heck this is, but we'll create a brand new scene for the next video. All right, so everybody keep watching.